A billionaire trapped in a storm, pounding his steering wheel in frustration. His $1 million car dead, his phone useless. Then out of the darkness steps a homeless man, soaked and smiling, gripping a rusty wrench. He looks the billionaire in the eye and says, "I can fix your car." What happens next will flip the idea of rich and poor on its head, because that night, the man with nothing gave the man with everything something money could never buy. "Stop the car. Stop it now." The shout cut through the thunder like a blade. It was raw, urgent, and coming from the shadows ahead. A man wrapped in a torn jacket, face half lit by the flicker of a dying streetlight. Rain came down in sheets, drumming on metal, pooling on the cracked asphalt. The silver sedan had limped to a stop in the middle of that deserted road. Its headlights shone weakly through the storm as steam hissed from under the hood. Inside the car sat Raymond Chase, the billionaire engineer everyone in Silicon Valley worshipped. The genius behind an AI empire, the man with mansions on 3 continents, private jets, and the confident smile of someone who believed money could untangle any mess. Except this mess. The engine had sputtered, groaned, and died without so much as a polite warning. The dashboard flashed red like an angry orchestra of alarms, and when Raymond reached for his sleek smartphone to summon help, not a single bar of signal appeared. The storm had swallowed every connection, even his satellite link. He gritted his teeth. "Unbelievable," he muttered. The world's smartest man stranded in the world's simplest problem. He didn't mind rain, he minded being powerless. Then came that voice. "Stop the car. Stop it now." Raymond glanced up. A figure was jogging toward him through the rain, one arm waving, the other clutching something long and metallic. For a fleeting second, the billionaire's heartbeat spiked. Out here, alone in the dark, could this man be trouble? He pressed the door lock button, and the click of the mechanism sounded louder than the rain. The stranger stopped a few feet from the car, panting. Up close, under the flickering light, Raymond could see his clothes, muddy, frayed, years past their expiry date. His hair was a tangled nest, his shoes mismatched and barely holding together. The metallic thing in his hand, thankfully, was just a wrench. "Engines flooded," the man shouted over the storm. "If you keep forcing it, you'll make it worse." Raymond frowned. "And you would know that, how?" The stranger smiled, a surprisingly kind expression beneath the grime. "Because I've fixed more cars than you've probably owned, my friend." He lifted his rusty wrench as if it were a sword of honor. "I can fix your car." Raymond hesitated. Every instinct in him screamed no. This man looked like trouble, a homeless drifter, maybe high, maybe dangerous. He'd built a life avoiding risks like this. He trusted contracts, algorithms, and background checks. Not strangers in alleys. But the rain was relentless, growing colder by the minute. He was alone. And the man's voice wasn't desperate. It carried quiet confidence, the steady tone of someone who actually believed what he said. He lowered the window, just an inch, just enough to speak. "You can fix this?" he asked, nodding toward the car's sleek hood. "That's not some old clunker from the 90s. It's a custom-engineered hybrid prototype. Cost me more zeros than I need to hear," the man interrupted, grinning. "Doesn't matter. An engine is an engine. Fancy or old, they still breathe the same way." That phrase caught Raymond off guard. Engines breathe. Whoever this man was, he spoke like someone who understood machines on an almost spiritual level. "Go ahead then," Raymond said slowly, testing him. "Prove it." The stranger's eyes gleamed. Without another word, he stepped closer, rain pouring down his face, and popped open the hood. Steam burst upward in a white cloud, and Raymond instinctively flinched. But the man didn't move back. He just studied the intricate wires and pipes like a surgeon examining a living heart. He whistled low. Someone's been pushing her too hard," he murmured. "You didn't give her time to cool after that last climb, did you?" Raymond blinked. "What? How did you know I drove uphill?" The man shrugged. "Engines talk if you listen." Then he looked up again, smiling through the rain. "Name's Marcus." Raymond opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time in years, he had absolutely no idea what to say. Here was a man who looked like the world had abandoned him long ago, kneeling in the mud to help someone who owned everything. Yet his back was straight, his voice even, his hands sure. He didn't plead or beg, he worked. As lightning flashed across the sky, Raymond thought he saw something almost regal in Marcus's silhouette. A strange dignity, like the storm itself, bowed to his calm. Inside the car, the billionaire sat in silence, watching this drenched stranger tinker with wires and bolts, each movement confident and careful. And for the first time in a long, long time, Raymond Chase, the man who could buy anything, felt something he hadn't felt since childhood. He felt curiosity. The man introduced himself as Marcus, his voice low but steady, carrying a hint of pride buried beneath exhaustion. His fingers, though calloused and cracked, moved with a craftsman's poetry. Each turn of a bolt, each careful tug of wire spoke volumes. Raymond could tell at once. This wasn't guesswork. It was memory. Every metallic click echoed stories that Marcus didn't need to tell. The way his hands hovered over the engine, tracing shapes in the air before making a single move, it was like he could see the machine's heartbeat. That kind of certainty didn't come from hobbyists or YouTube tutorials. It came from years in oil-stained overalls, from nights spent under bright shop lights long after everyone else had gone home. From a life that had known purpose. Rain kept hammering down, turning the street into a shimmer of puddles. Marcus didn't flinch. Water rolled off his jacket, slid down his face and pooled around his knees as he knelt on the slick pavement. He worked with the peace of a man who had found in this engine the rhythm of something larger than the storm around him. Raymond, meanwhile, stood beside the car with his coat collar turned up, completely unsure what to do. He was used to being the man doing, giving orders, closing deals, controlling outcomes. But here in the cold rain he was suddenly useless. Utterly, uncomfortably human. He tried to busy himself by studying Marcus's movements. Every gesture was deliberate. No hesitation, no wasted effort, just flow. At one point, Marcus glanced up and caught Raymond watching. "You got a name?" he asked casually, though his hands never stopped working. "Raymond," the billionaire replied, clearing his throat. "Raymond Chase." Marcus's mouth curved into a half-smile. "Fancy name for a man stranded in the rain," he said. There was no disrespect in his tone, just an easy humor that somehow made the moment warmer. "Yeah," Raymond chuckled softly, surprising himself. "I'm not exactly in my element here." "Don't worry," Marcus said. "The rain's got no favorites. Rich or poor, we all get wet the same." The words lingered in the air longer than Raymond expected. We all get wet the same. Simple, yet sharp enough to pierce through years of polished boardroom talk and luxury dinners. Minutes passed. The sound of the wrench turning, the rain's steady rhythm and Marcus's quiet concentration filled the space between them. Raymond realized he hadn't been this silent near another person in years. It was oddly peaceful. Finally Marcus leaned back and exhaled. "All right," he muttered. "Let's try her now." Raymond hesitated before sliding into the driver's seat. The car smelled faintly of leather, ozone, and the distant sweetness of success that usually followed him wherever he went. But tonight, victory wasn't guaranteed. He pressed the start button. The engine coughed, sputtered, a long pause, and then roared to life with a deep, satisfied purr. Raymond jumped slightly, partly from the noise, partly from disbelief. The man had done it. In the middle of a thunderstorm, without fancy tools or a dry inch to stand on, this stranger had coaxed his silent machine back to life. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the relentless beating of rain. Marcus stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his soaked jacket. His face was half hidden in shadow, but Raymond noticed something glisten on his cheek. Maybe rain, maybe tears. "I told you I could fix it," Marcus said quietly, his voice trembling just enough to give him away. It wasn't boasting, it was relief. A tiny piece of his old self proving it hadn't been lost. Raymond climbed out of the car, still dazed. He reached instinctively for his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of $100 bills. Money had always been his universal language, his apology, his gratitude, his power. But as he extended the bills toward Marcus, the man raised his hand sharply. "Keep it," he said firmly. "I didn't do it for that." The words hit like a thunderclap. Raymond froze mid-motion, the bills fluttering slightly in the wind. No one had ever refused his money. Not employees begging for bonuses, not partners fighting for funding, not even strangers he'd tipped for minor conveniences. To Raymond, money was oxygen. It made everything run smoother. But here was a man who breathed without it. Marcus met his eyes, not defiant, not bitter, just calm. "You looked like you needed help, that's all." "And well," he gave a crooked smile. "Maybe I needed to feel useful again." Something in Raymond's chest twisted. 4 years he'd measured worth in investments, returns, and innovation. But this man, drenched and broke, had just reminded him of something older, purer, the quiet dignity of doing good simply because you can. He wanted to argue, to insist, to press the bills into Marcus's hands anyway. But he didn't. Instead, he slipped the wallet back into his coat and said softly, "Thank you." Marcus nodded once as if that was enough. He patted the hood of the car affectionately. "She'll get you home now. Just, don't push her so hard." The rain had begun to lighten, turning from a downpour into a gentle mist. Raymond stood watching as Marcus walked away, his silhouette fading into the night like the ending of a story he didn't yet understand. For the first time in years, Raymond felt small, but in a way that felt strangely beautiful. Raymond insisted Marcus come with him. The rain had eased into a mist, the kind that clung to your clothes and cooled your bones. Marcus tried to wave him off at first, mumbling something about being fine, but Raymond wouldn't hear it. "Look, it's late, you're soaked, and I owe you more than just a thank you. Let me at least buy you dinner," he said, firm but kind. Marcus hesitated, half turning away as if he might vanish back into the shadows he came from. But Raymond saw the flicker of conflict in the man's eyes. Pride was wrestling with exhaustion. After a long pause, Marcus nodded. "All right," he said softly. "But I'm paying for the coffee." That made Raymond laugh, an honest laugh, the first in days. They drove in silence for a few minutes until they reached a small diner tucked off the main road. The neon sign buzzed faintly, half the letters burned out so that it read Diner instead of diner. It was the kind of place Raymond's elite friends would never step foot in, but to him now, it felt oddly comforting. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of frying bacon, coffee, and nostalgia. A waitress with curlers in her hair gave them a sleepy nod and led them to a booth by the window. Vinyl seats squeaked, a jukebox hummed quietly in the corner, and the linoleum floor had stories of its own. Marcus sat across from Raymond, his shoulders relaxing under the gentle glow of the fluorescent lights. When 2 steaming mugs arrived, he wrapped his hands around his cup like it was a small fire. "You know," he said, glancing out the window, "it's been a while since I've had coffee in a place like this. Used to come to diners all the time after closing up shop." "Closing up shop?" Raymond asked. Marcus nodded, smiling softly. "Yeah. I had a garage once. Small, nothing fancy, but folks trusted me. I could fix anything on 4 wheels. Had 2 loyal employees, old radio always playing Motown, and my wife, Haley, used to drop by with sandwiches and tell me I smelled like gasoline in glory." He chuckled at the memory, a sound full of warmth and ache tangled together. Raymond leaned in, fascinated. "What happened?" Marcus's smile faded, replaced by the faraway look of someone replaying a movie that never ends the way you want. "Life happened. Haley got sick. Real sick. Doctors called it autoimmune something. I can't even pronounce it. And suddenly the shop wasn't about engines anymore. It was just cashing out everything I owned to buy her weeks of hope." Raymond lowered his gaze. He'd funded hospitals, medical startups, and biotech firms, yet listening to this man's story felt heavier than any report he'd ever read. "She fought," Marcus continued, tracing the rim of his mug. "She fought hard. But when she passed, everything kind of went quiet. The noise in my head, the smell of oil, even the hum of machines, it all stopped meaning anything." He looked at his reflection in the black surface of his coffee. "So I stopped too. Stopped showing up. Lost the shop, the house. Before I knew it, I was just another story people walked past." The diner's steady hum filled the long silence that followed. Raymond stared at the thin plume of steam twisting up from his cup. His suit jacket felt heavier on his shoulders. Normally he was the one doing the talking, pitching, presenting, leading. But Marcus had turned the world on its side without even trying. "You know," Marcus said after a while, his tone brightening just enough, "I used to think the worst thing that could happen was having nothing. Losing your things, your home, your place in the world. But these days I think having too much can make you just as empty. Maybe worse." Raymond looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Marcus smiled faintly, eyes glinting in the diner light. "When you've got nothing, you still dream about what you could be. But when you've got everything, sometimes you forget how to dream. You start keeping score instead of living." The words hit Raymond harder than any boardroom critique, harder than any speech from a shareholder or rival. He'd spent years building an empire, filling rooms with applause and schedules so tight he forgot what silence sounded like. And now this man, with wet sleeves and tired eyes, had just summarized everything he hadn't wanted to admit. He leaned back in the booth, suddenly aware of how sterile his life had become. The glass offices, the virtual meetings, the luxury jets, they were all brilliant distractions from the emptiness he never named. Marcus took a sip of coffee and nodded toward him. "You ever fix something, Raymond?" "I build things," he said. "Companies, systems, digital empires." Marcus chuckled softly. "Then you know what I mean. Sometimes fixing something means tearing it apart first." Raymond's chest tightened at the unintended truth buried in those words. The waitress appeared with 2 plates, pancakes and scrambled eggs, and left as quietly as she came. Marcus grinned like a kid and dove in. Raymond couldn't help smiling, watching the spark of life return to this man's face with something as simple as warm food. And somewhere between the hiss of the coffee machine and the rain tapping against the window, something inside Raymond shifted. The billionaire who'd always measured life in numbers realized just how heavy all his wealth had become, and how light one honest conversation could make him feel. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains of Raymond's penthouse suite. For the first time in years he had slept deeply, not from exhaustion but from something softer, something closer to peace. Yet the image of Marcus, soaked to the bone but smiling through the rain, refused to leave his mind. So, over breakfast he made a call. "Bring me the files for our transportation division," he told his assistant. "I want to meet someone at the warehouse today." A few hours later, a sleek company SUV pulled up beside a park bench where Marcus was sitting, sipping coffee from a paper cup and talking quietly with an older woman who was feeding the pigeons. When he looked up and saw Raymond approaching in a crisp shirt and polished shoes, his eyes widened slightly. "You again?" Marcus grinned. "Car still running?" "Better than ever," Raymond replied. "Which actually brings me here. I realized I've got a few vehicles that could use someone like you. How'd you like to come work for me?" Marcus blinked, then frowned a little. "Work for you?" "Head mechanic," Raymond said, excitement creeping into his tone. "Good pay, full support, equipment, everything you'd need." For a long moment Marcus said nothing. He just stared at the coffee in his hands, watching the steam twist up into the cool morning air. Then he looked up with a calm, almost apologetic smile. "I appreciate that, Raymond. Really. But I don't think I need a job right now." Raymond blinked, confused. "Don't need a job?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. I need to fix myself first. I spent years trying to patch up engines while my own gears were grinding. I need to find solid ground again on my own terms." Raymond opened his mouth to reply, then stopped. He could have insisted. Could have offered 10 times the salary. But he heard the quiet truth behind Marcus's words. One man trying to reclaim his own story. And for once, Raymond didn't try to control the outcome. "All right," he said finally. "Then let's do this your way." A week later, after a few quick phone calls and one very persuasive meeting with his business manager, a small former auto shop at the edge of downtown was cleaned, painted, and fitted with new equipment. The front sign, its letters hand-painted by a local artist, read, "Marcus Repairs and Restores Hope." The name was Marcus's idea. Raymond just paid for the dream. From the day it opened, the shop became something unusual. People didn't just come to fix cars, they came to talk, to breathe, to remember what community felt like. Marcus had a way of listening that made everyone feel like they mattered. He tuned their words the same way he tuned engines, with patience, precision, and heart. An old woman from the neighborhood brought her dusty sedan one afternoon. Marcus not only fixed her alternator but noticed her trembling hands and offered to drive her home. A week later, a young man struggling with debt came in for a repair. Marcus let him pay by doing small errands for the shop. Stories like those spread quickly. What began as a modest garage turned into a small legend, a place where wheels turned, laughter echoed, and second chances were not just given but built piece by piece. And every so often, a black luxury car would pull up out front, and Raymond Chase would step out, not with his corporate swagger but with quiet respect. Sometimes they talked business, about expanding Marcus's shop into a foundation that trained people from shelters. More often they just talked about life, engines, and how both needed the occasional oil change. One afternoon, while the two sat in the shade outside the garage drinking coffee from greasy paper cups, Raymond confessed, "You know, Marcus, I used to think success was about how much control I had. Now I think it's about how much I can let go." Marcus chuckled. "Guess we both fixed something after all, huh?" Months later, during an interview for a finance magazine, a journalist asked Raymond, "Out of all your investments, the tech startups, the medical companies, what's been the best return you've ever had?" Raymond smiled, eyes softening. He thought of the rain, the wrench, the engine that refused to die, and the man who reminded him what wealth really meant. "My best investment?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "A broken car on a rainy night." And for once, that billionaire answer had nothing to do with money at all. Months later, the seasons had shifted. The chill of winter had melted into a mild, forgiving spring, and downtown buzzed with the soft hum of renewal. Raymond's days had been full: board meetings, product launches, sleek conferences where sharp minds talked about progress as if it were a shiny object that could be neatly measured. But somewhere between the applause and the exhaustion, one name kept drifting through his thoughts: Marcus. One hazy afternoon he decided to drive back to that little garage, the one that had started as a favor but had grown into something greater than profit. As he pulled onto the narrow street lined with small shops, he spotted it immediately. The hand-painted sign still hung proudly. Marcus repairs and restores hope. The place was alive. The clatter of tools mixed with music playing softly from a workshop radio. Old blues, something cozy and familiar. The smell of motor oil and fresh coffee filled the air, a strangely comforting combination. Inside, Marcus stood over an open engine, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in grease. He was humming, lost in rhythm, smiling like a man who had made peace with the noise of the world. Raymond approached quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "You're humming," he said lightly. Marcus looked up and grinned. "Helps me think. That, and it scares away the silence." Raymond chuckled, though his tone carried something tender. "Do you ever think about that night?" Marcus reached for a rag, wiping the oil from his hands before answering. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost ritualistic. "Every day," he said softly. "That night changed a lot more than your engine, brother." Raymond tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned back against the workbench, eyes far away yet anchored in the moment. "You know, I heard you before I saw you." Raymond blinked. "Heard me?" "Yeah," Marcus said, tapping his chest gently. "Right here. You were crying on the inside. Money screams loud, but loneliness—" He paused, his voice dropping to a quiet hum. "Loneliness whispers. And I've learned to hear it." The words cut through the air, simple yet devastating. Raymond felt a lump form in his throat. For so long he had believed power came from keeping walls intact, from masking every ache under layers of accomplishment. Hearing Marcus say it out loud, seeing him name the quiet ache he'd spent years pretending didn't exist, felt like being gently unmasked. He sat down on a nearby stool, running a hand through his hair. The faint aroma of oil and dust seemed to pull memories from him. Years of empty dinners, of conversations filled with strategy instead of laughter. And across from him stood a man who had learned to live without either fortune or fame, and somehow seemed richer for it. "You know," Raymond murmured almost to himself, "I thought I was doing you a favor that night." Marcus smiled knowingly. "And I thought I was just fixing a car. Guess we were both wrong." For a long moment, neither spoke. The radio hummed softly in the background, the same blues song looping through gentle guitar riffs. Outside, a kid rode by on a rusted bike, calling out a greeting to Marcus, who waved back with a grin. Raymond watched him, an unshakable warmth blossoming in his chest. Here was a man who had every reason to be bitter, yet chose kindness as naturally as breathing. He rose to leave, reluctant but calm. Marcus wiped his hands once more and followed him outside, standing at the edge of the lot. "You take care of that car, all right? She's more than a machine now," Marcus said, half joking, half serious. Raymond nodded, opening the car door. "Trust me, I know." As he drove off, he caught sight of the garage shrinking in his rearview mirror, the sign glinting under the sunlight, the figure of Marcus still standing by the gate. And something welled up inside him. Words. Gratitude. Truth. Quietly, he whispered into the empty car, "I can fix your car." Then, as the wind lifted the sound away, he added with a faint, trembling smile, "And maybe you also fixed me." For the first time in years, Raymond didn't feel like he was chasing anything. He felt whole, like an engine tuned just right, steady, alive, and finally at peace. And that was the story of "I Can Fix Your Car." If it touched your heart, don't just scroll away, show some love. Hit that like button, drop a comment about what you learned from Marcus and Raymond, and subscribe for more inspiring stories that feed the soul. Turn on the bell so you never miss a tale that reminds us, no matter how broken life gets, there's always something, and someone worth fixing.